All right, everyone. For the most part, during the political race on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, it's Trump is the nominee. There's no question about that, really. Unless he were to die, basically, or drop out on his own. On the Democratic side, it's been relatively stagnant for a while. For months, it's basically been a story of Biden is way out ahead, like 10 points ahead. In his lowest poll to Sanders' highest, he's almost 10 points ahead. So he's clearly the front runner by a long margin. Bernie Sanders in second, and then sort of Warren and Harris, waffling back and forth, sort of stealing one another's votes depending on what day it is and depending on what polling period it is, and being sort of tied for third. And then you have rounding out sort of that top tier. You have, Francis O'Rourke, Beto, better known as Beto, his fake name, and then Pete Buttigieg. And they sort of do the same thing that Warren and Kamala Harris have been doing. But now Elizabeth Warren has been having a few good weeks, and now some of her polls are approaching or exceeding a few of Bernie Sanders. It looks like she and Bernie Sanders may end up being sort of doing a tango the same way that Warren has been with Kamala Harris. Now, I say this. If Elizabeth Warren somehow does become the Dem nominee, it'll be the funniest fucking thing that I've ever seen in my life. Can you fucking imagine how fun? It'd be palpably humorous for Trump because he's already given her, her nickname years ago, and he's, already lambasted her, and she's cracked like an egg on multiple different occasions. She can be combative and antagonistic too. So they'll sit there antagonizing each other. The things that'll be said in such a race would be hilarious. Whereas with Biden, he gets the moniker Sleepy Joe, not just because it rhymes with Creepy Joe, in part because he's not really like that. He's not like an Elizabeth Warren. He's more like, he and Kamala Harris are more, I think, well-spoken, coherent after a fashion. Now with Biden, that he's also probably demented a little bit, so that doesn't always take effect. He does make a lot of gaffes, but generally, like, his speaking abilities are normal. Whereas Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, they're the firebrands. They're the ones that get more antagonized. They get more fiery. There's more energy. It's funny to think of Bernie Sanders being more energetic than most of the field despite being almost 80, which he is, and it's really, really hilarious. Like, the only thing that gets more crazy than Bernie Sanders when he gets off into one of his rants about how Marx was okay and socialism isn't really that far left because reasons, the only thing that's more like high energy than that on the Dem side is when Beto goes nuts and starts waving his hands around and screaming like a lunatic because he wants to pretend to be an evangelical minister or something like that. With Warren, though, potentially stealing Sanders' thunder, this would basically would give Biden the nomination. Because right now, his main problem is overcoming Bernie Sanders. These are polls in early states, not aggregated polls in the whole country. But Warren doesn't need to be ahead in the whole country. What do we know? You have to target the states individually. Trump did this and managed to win despite losing the popular vote. Because he spent all his time in the Rust Belt. He realized some states that look like they're on the edge, they're not really. I'm going to go into these states that nobody thinks are in play, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I'm going to canvass them constantly. And by that, I'll get more votes and I'll win these states, and that's how I'll win the election. And it worked. Warren realizes, I think, all she has to do is, if she manages somehow to take Iowa, then all of a sudden she shoots up. She would become the anti-Biden. Potentially, if Bernie Sanders starts to fold, those voters will back her in New Hampshire. She could become the nominee. It's a long shot, though. It's a very long shot premise. But, for any of the candidates, their way forward relies upon them winning at least one of the first 4 states, preferably 2. And in some cases, for some of them, they'd probably need a third. Because electability is the main issue on people's minds. Well, if you can't even win one of the first primary states before Super Tuesday, how the hell are you going to be electable against Trump? The reason these states have been chosen for a very special reason. Now, my own opinion, Iowa should no longer be first. Iowa is now a lean red state. It's no longer really a swing state like it was prior to 2012. New Hampshire would be more appropriate. They should switch the two around and have the New Hampshire primary first, because that is now a true bellwether. That the state was almost 50-50. They should put Florida at the 4 too. Florida would be a good choice. Florida keeps being so close, so razor thin, there's an automatic recount in every fucking election in the state. Because it's a tale of 2 states. The southern third of the state is overwhelmingly liberal, very Hispanic, a lot of city life. The northern third of the state is more rural. It's extremely red. It's more like Alabama or Georgia. And then in the middle, you've got the swings. The Tampa to Orlando sort of region is the swing state territory. That's the part that I, by the way, lived in briefly. Really weird state. Oh my God, there's like, you know, vegetable stands and fruit stands everywhere where, you know, fruit is like 5 cents an orange sort of prices, which is pretty sweet. Weird little gas stations, and like they were selling like spice and weird shit. Gas stations and head shops are the same thing down there for the most part. It's really weird, actually, in the Tampa area. Well, Sefner, outside of Tampa. Interesting place. The weather sucks if you don't have an air conditioner. At the time, I wasn't privy to one. It was a sad time. You don't need to take a shower because you're continuously sweating. And then you take a shower and, you know, you towel off and you're dry for like 5 minutes and then you're soaking wet again. It's like, why even fucking bother? But Warren overtaking him in early states could prevent Here's the thing. Biden's probably going to win Iowa. And if he doesn't, he's probably fucked, which is hilarious to think of. Unless he gets both South Carolina and Nevada, he'd be screwed at that point. But Bernie Sanders' only way forward is to win New Hampshire. If Warren ends up overtaking him, if she takes some of his votes away in a viable 3-person contest, Biden could win New Hampshire with, 35-40%. Steal that, and then Sanders gets knocked out. He will not succeed as a candidate if he loses New Hampshire. That's a guarantee, because the news of the day would be Bernie Sanders can't even compete in the state right next to his that's basically the same thing but more guns and less taxes. For those who aren't aware of the dynamic between Vermont and New Hampshire, we're like the hippie-trippy New Hampshire, and they're like the gun-toting low-tax Vermont. And so there's a lot of crossover. Like, our states enjoy extreme amounts of political cooperation. We were conjoined at one point anyway. Vermont was also part of New York at one point, back when it was a British territory. And then it became its own republic for a couple of years, had its own currency, which is hella expensive and everything, before we became a state. By the way, we outlawed slavery before joining, and our constitution is like Texas's in that it explicitly allows us to secede, even though it'll never happen. That'd be funny to have this one little landlocked cold state like sandwiched in the U.S., between the U.S. and Canada. It'd be really funny. Then there'd be a Quebec liberation movement. I'm sure Vermont would sign right on. The balkanization has begun. Oh my God, Vermont is independent now. How will we survive without those Vermonters? In the Civil War, it would have been hard, trust me. Or the Revolution with the Green Mountain Boys, per se. But Warren probably can't defeat Biden, but she can prevent Bernie Sanders from defeating Biden. Which would be hilarious. It'd be like, every sane person in the Democratic Party would breathe a sigh of relief, because what you need, the Democrats should choose Biden, a sane, moderate candidate, big quotations there, that's what passes for a moderate now, and then he would lose. And the party will crash and burn and everyone will blame one another, and then like a phoenix from the ashes of the Democratic Party that will have been fucked in the ass, maybe they get a party of JFK reform movement going on, they go back to being actual liberals, and they stop trying to just terrorize people who have guns, and they stop rambling about race and sex and all of these dead wedge issues from the 90s, and they stop trying to be socialists, and they become like a reformist party. Actual liberals standing for the Constitution, opposing corporate censorship, opposing corporate welfare, which is to say just another form of welfare, and it'd be great. We'll see if a classically liberal core can spring up in the wake of the death of the far left, which it will. The far left is not going to possess enough power to command the Democratic Party. There aren't enough crazy Democrats, I think, to even elect someone like Sanders. It'd be hilarious. Sanders would lose because he's a socialist. I hope that all the socialists who like him realize this. Overwhelmingly, we reject socialism. The fact that people who are too young to vote don't at this moment is probably going to change in the near future. Just don't worry about it too much. It's a paradigm shift. That's about all. Peace out.